there's not a really great way to measure that this tibial rotation is occurring, which then leads to the next question. Well, then, do we need to care about this? And do we need tibial rotation in particular programs? Thank you for tuning in this week. This is your host, Dr. Dillon Caswell. In today's episode, we are talking all about the knee joint, specifically how do we get knee extension, and not just knee extension, but this tibial rotation that happens called the screw home mechanism. How does it occur? What do we do with it? Do we specifically need to practice tibial rotation to achieve full knee extension? It's a great episode. We hope you enjoy it. Today's show is sponsored by the Prehab app. This is not just an app, but a solution. You have the opportunity to take control of your rehab, prehab, fitness, and performance needs all from the palm of your hand. The app is available for download on the App Store for both Apple and Android users. Also, a free 7-day trial is available. Don't wait. Start taking control of your movement health today. Welcome back to the show. Today we're going to start the episode talking about creativity. Where does creativity come from? Creativity comes from first having curiosity, because without curiosity, there's no desire to want to understand. And without the ability to fully understand something, then we cannot become creative with solutions until full understanding is gained. So if you want to become more creative, you have to become more curious. When you start to become more curious and you start to learn things first, you pick up patterns. You pick up patterns that are pretty superficial. But then as you start learning more about that particular topic, you dive into it and you learn more details. You learn more nuances to that what was once superficial pattern. Once that is developed, then creativity can take over. One example I can give here. When I was first learning about hurricanes, what I learned is that you need warm ocean water that is rising up in the atmosphere and mixes with the wind coming in. So we need warm water and we need wind. And I thought, okay, cool. I know the basics about hurricanes. And studying them more and just learning more about them, just because I was curious and wanted to know, I learned that there's these crazy dust storms that happen in the Sahara Desert. Wind whips around, dust is picked up, it's in the air, it stays in the atmosphere and actually comes across the Atlantic Ocean. In doing this, the iron-rich particles, so the more dust that goes up into the air, into the atmosphere, the iron-rich particles actually deflect the sunlight. When it deflects the sunlight, it then decreases the temperature below it, which would create a cooler ocean, meaning that the chances of a hurricane are now decreased because of these dust storms that are happening in the Sahara Desert. So again, learn the basics first, and then if it's interesting to you, keep diving into it and learn more and more. Today's episode, that's what we're going to start with. We're going to talk about learning the basics of a particular motion and then learning the nuanced version of it. We're not going to talk about any more weather patterns because that is not one of my strengths. But what we will talk about is something within the movement system, the human body, and that is the knee, specifically knee extension. You may have heard of knee extension before and how important it is. So let's start with the very basics. The knee joint. Femur comes down, meets the tibia. The patella is on top of that. We'll slide up and down to give the quad a better moment arm. And we know that this joint is a modified hinge joint. So if you think of a pure hinge or a hinge joint, it's a joint that moves in only one motion. It has flexion and it has extension. It only moves in this one way. Another way you can think about this is a doorway. A door has two hinges on it typically, unless it's one of those revolving doors, which if it's one of those ones, I recommend to get in that revolving door and just start running as fast as you can, as many times as you can, until you get a little dizzy and then get out of that just because it's fun. But the regular hinge joint on the door or hinge on the door, it moves in one pattern. So the knee joint is thought to be a modified hinge joint, meaning that it does move in this one particular pattern, but it also has rotation available. The axis of the joint is also moving. And this is one reason that knee braces have had a really hard time trying to mimic natural knee motion. And I don't know if they ever will because of this rotation that is occurring and that the axis is actually moving as the knee joint is going through flexion and extension. So it is a modified hinge joint that has rotation. In today's discussion, we're going to break down into that a little bit further of what creates this tibial rotation. Do we need specific exercises to work on tibial rotation when trying to restore knee extension? But before getting there, let's take a quick step back and just answer the question, why is knee extension important? It is the number one thing that we are after in a knee rehab program. whether it's post-op meniscus, whether it's a total knee replacement, whether it's post-op ACL reconstruction, whether it's just having some knee discomfort, knee pain, knee extension range of motion is the first goal. And it has to be the first goal, because without full knee extension, we lose the ability to have a normalized walking pattern. We lose the ability to lock out in stance and achieve this full standing position. So we need full knee extension. I remember this one athlete that I got to work with. She was coming back home from college. It was during a break from in between semesters. And she was a D1 athlete. The school reached out and said, "Hey, you're doing blood flow restriction. Do you mind working with this athlete?" She was, pretty far along in her rehab process from the time she had surgery to when I got to meet with her. And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, I'd love to." So I'm excited. I'm like, "Oh, wow, we're going to do blood flow restriction. We're going to be doing some higher level movements with this athlete who's a very gifted athlete." She comes into the clinic and we start, and it's like, I just want to do a full eval just to make sure we're not missing out on something before we get to the exciting things. What we found was that she was lacking 10 degrees of knee extension. At this point, we do not need to move on to these quote unquote fancy activities. We need to gain knee extension. She needs 0 degrees of knee extension to be able to do these activities. And when she's squatting, there's a little bit of a bent. When she's running, there's a limp. Well, yes, because full knee extension had not been gained. So that is our starting point. If you are dealing with knee pain, knee extension is crucial. If you're a provider creating a program for someone that is post-op, we know how important knee extension is. So let's make sure that we are gaining that knee extension. With that, then what the question becomes, well, then what could prevent knee extension from being full? And we've talked about previous episodes of this. One of these things could be swelling. If there's swelling within the joint capsule itself, that can limit the amount of knee extension range of motion that we have. So with Tommy Mandela, we were talking about you need to achieve a quiet knee. What does a quiet knee mean? It means one, that it's not constantly swelling on you over and over again. And that comes back to load management. And I know right now load management is kind of being poked at from NBA commentators and athletes that, well, back in my day, there wasn't load management. We just kept playing. But load management simply is that we're going to work to a level that your body is able to be pushed, but tolerate and then adapt. Because if we just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, the body's not able to adapt to it. So if you're coming off of a knee surgery and you're putting in, let's say 3,000 steps and things are feeling great, cool. Let's go up to 3,500 steps. Let's go up to 4,000 steps. You go up to 4,000 steps and knee swelling's back, pain is back, there's discomfort. Well, we need to bump that down a little bit and allow you to adapt. So maybe we do 3,800 steps and then gradually work back up to that 4,000. So we want to achieve a quiet knee. One of the other ways that we achieve this quiet knee, aside from load management, is getting these muscles activating again. We know when there's knee pain, when there's a knee surgery, that the quads become inhibited from the neural system. So we have to work to get the quad back contracting so that it can help to pump the swelling out of there. And out of the things that can pump swelling out of any part of the body, muscle contraction is by far the most powerful. Compression boots feel good. Compression socks help when we're in independent positions. But the thing that's going to pump the most amount of swelling out is muscle contraction. So knee extension, quad contraction have to be our first two goals when we're talking anything knee extension. So those are the basic patterns that we need to understand and achieve. Now let's get more nuanced. Let's get into those dust particles floating in the atmosphere that decrease hurricanes, but more related into the knee. Tibial rotation. A lot of people kind of forget that the tibia does have rotation that occurs in the last 20 to 30 degrees of knee extension. So imagine that you're sitting on a table, your legs are dangling. They're starting in this 90-degree position where the leg is just hanging down off the table. You go to do a quad extension along our quad, you're kicking your leg up towards the ceiling and you're getting towards full knee extension, which is 0 degrees. And that last 20 to 0 degrees in that movement, we see that the tibia is actually going to externally rotate and then lock out into full knee extension. This mechanism is called the screw home mechanism. And it's really fascinating of how this happens, because most of the time for a joint to move in a particular position, it relies on a muscle pulling it to happen. And what's really interesting is that with this screw home mechanism going into knee extension, when the tibia is externally rotating to lock out, or if you're in closed chain, so if you're rising up from a squat, let's say that you're in a squat, your thigh is parallel to the ground. That's 90 degrees. As you're going from 90 to 0 degrees, now because the tibia is in stance with the ground because of its connection with the ankle joint, the femur is actually going to internally rotate, which by the femur internally rotating, the tibia externally rotates, and we still achieve that screw home mechanism. But anyway, back to the point, what's really cool here is that whether it's an open chain or whether it's in closed chain, this rotation does not happen because of a muscle pulling it into rotation. With that being said, yes, there are the hamstrings and the lateral hamstrings of biceps femoris, which when that contracts, it can bias a little bit of tibial rotation. There are other muscles that rotate the femur higher up on the femoral shaft. But at the knee joint, the screw home mechanism, which is really cool, it actually happens because of how the joint is created. And if you're watching the video, I'm going to show a little knee model here. The kneecap isn't on there, but we have I had it upside down. We have the lateral side, and then we have the medial side. The medial side of the femur coming down, has a larger medial condyle and a larger medial tibial plateau. So as the knee is actually rising up into extension, that bony makeup of the knee that we all have actually creates that rotation to occur. Really cool. So the quad's pulling it up. The quad is just focused on knee extension, and because of the bony makeup, the tibia is actually going to rotate almost, I don't want to say passively because the quad is moving the tibia, but because of the bony makeup of our knee joint, it actually rotates. So when people are putting together these prosthetics for the knee or for a total knee replacement, they're trying to recreate that anatomy to make sure that we're getting that screw home mechanism. So really, really cool. The other cool part to this is that, well, if the knee locks into that full locked out position, which is great for efficiency in standing, we need it for walking, we need that knee extension and we need that rotation to occur. Well, then what helps to unlock it? Because we just said, well, this kind of happens as the quad is lifting it and the bony congruency allows it to rotate. But what unlocks it? And the way that I remember this, and I like to teach this to the students because it helps it to stick a little bit more, is think about locking a door. And then think about how you have to unlock a door. When you're locking a door, you can turn the knob and then shut it, and it will kind of lock on its own. I know that happens because I've done that to myself so many different times. I continuously lock myself out of the house or leave my keys in the door. But anyway, you turn the knob, you can walk out, shut the door, and it's going to lock behind you. So there's a quick motion, so the quad extending, and then it happened and the thing locked, the tibia rotating because of the bony congruency. But now to unlock the door, you have to actively do something else. You have to put the key into the door, you then have to turn it, and then you can open the door. So when we're unlocking the knee, there is a muscle that is actually needed to unlock it. This muscle, you may have heard of it before. It is called the popliteus muscle. It lives on the back part of the knee. It's a deep muscle. It's underneath the hamstrings. It's underneath where the calves come up and attach. It's a very deep muscle called the popliteus. Now, I say this muscle with some caution because what tends to happen is that we hear a muscle, it has a fancy name, so then we decide that we're going to call this thing a syndrome, right? We've talked about this before on a previous episode of piriformis syndrome. It's a fancy muscle that people may not have heard of before, and it sounds fancy, so when we put syndrome behind it, it has a good ring to it. But I want to go on here and say that we're not going to create a popliteus syndrome, all right? One more time. We're not creating this thing of a popliteus syndrome. We're just understanding that the popliteus helps to unlock the knee when we're going from knee extension, full knee extension to knee flexion. And it does this by doing the opposite. It internally rotates the tibia, or it will externally rotate the femur if we're talking more about a closed chain position. So that is the popliteus muscle that does that. A really cool muscle that is in the human body that we tend to forget about a bit. I also want to take a step back and share another quick kind of funny story with you. I remember being in PT school and my buddy showed me this video. It was a particular healthcare provider. It was a person that had knee pain and they weren't able to achieve this position of knee extension and they go from knee extension to knee flexion. So the provider speculated that the reason that this is happening is because of popliteus dysfunction. So I guess we can kind of see where that theory may have been coming from. But where this video takes a turn for the worse is the solution that the provider proposed to, quote unquote, unlock the popliteus muscle. The provider proceeds to go behind the person's ear and push down behind the ear, and says that by doing this, they're unlocking the popliteus muscle that lives behind the knee underneath all these stronger muscles. So pressing behind the ear, that this is unlocking the popliteus muscle. And through it, he's biasing this patient so bad. Okay, my hand's behind your ear. I'm unlocking your popliteus muscle. Do you feel that muscle unlocking? Nodding his head, yes. And the patient goes, yeah, I guess so. All right, after this, you're going to feel so much better. After this technique is done, you're going to be feeling great. So they finish the technique. Oh, I bet you're feeling great right now. Hey, how are you feeling? And the patient's like, I guess I'm feeling okay. So it's a great video to show that, wow, how much are we biasing these techniques that we're using and not giving the patient or the client a fair opportunity to really assess and let us know what's happening. And then from a scientific perspective, we know that pushing behind the ear is not unlocking the popliteus muscle. But with that being said, the question may be coming up, well, with this tibial rotation that happens, do we need to, one, measure this? Do we need to measure tibial rotation, and how do we do that? And then two, do we need specific programs that are working on tibial rotation? So first question, can we measure this? PT, we tend to use goniometers, inclinometers to get our measurements. This tibial rotation that happens, it's a small range. There's research showing that it's about 8 to 12 degrees. So it's about 10 degrees with a 2-degree standard deviation in either direction. And the way that this was found was through imaging, and very, very specific imaging that was measuring this. So with our goniometers, with our inclinometers, we are not able to measure this, especially when we look at, well, what's the user error when we're using these things? And then how much of a significant change would we have to see for it to be clinically significant? Not worth it, right? So we can't actually measure how much tibial rotation there is. Now, you may see techniques in which a person is sitting and they have their foot on like a furniture slider, and they're now trying to rotate their foot in and rotate their foot out. The thought is being that by doing this, you can now get an assessment of tibial rotation. The nuance with this is that the person can really compensate. They can let their leg kind of collapse in a little bit at the femur to make it perceived as they're getting more tibial rotation. If you're looking at their foot, their ankle could be much more where that rotation is coming from, either by supinating or pronating. So there's really not a good way for us to measure this. The other part of this is that, well, what if we visually look at the tibial tubercle and we see how much the tibial tubercle is moving? So I'd say that that's fair to do, but how good are this test when we're palpating and visualizing it? So there's not a really great way to measure that this tibial rotation is occurring, which then leads to the next question. Well, then, do we need to care about this, and do we need tibial rotation in particular programs? We've seen this happen in other techniques that are out there, that you're moving a joint through its full range. So you're extending, and then once you extend, you're physically trying to rotate your tibia into external rotation. And then when you go into flexion, you're internally rotating and coming back down. It is a phenomenal motor control exercise. It's a very mindful movement, because your brain is not just thinking of, oh, I need to kick my leg up, but I need to kick up and then control a rotation. I need to bend down and control a rotation. So it's a very good mindful movement. And then how much tibial rotation is actually occurring in that, we don't really know, but it is being practiced. So where do we go with this in wrapping up this episode? Our advice with tibial rotation is that we need to understand that it happens. Tibial rotation occurs. The knee is a modified hinge joint. It has a little bit of rotation that happens. This last 20 degrees, going from 20 to 0 into knee extension, we have this anywhere from 8 to 12 degree range, some people more, some people less, of tibial rotation or femoral rotation on the tibia to give us this screw home mechanism. We know that the popliteus unlocks it and allows the knee to go down into flexion. We know that there's not this thing of popliteus syndrome and we can't just release the popliteus. But what do we do in programs if we're lacking knee extension and the swelling of the knee has been taken care of and they're getting a good quad contraction and they're still not able to get that full knee extension? They're still lacking that last little bit of knee extension. Well, this is where we might dive in and start to intentionally practice some tibial rotation. So this is where we would use it as that person that's stuck. They're not able to get that full knee extension. We can supplement with the tibial rotation. Are we able to measure it? Not really, but it is something that is worth just adding in if we are stuck. Hoping you enjoyed that episode on tibial rotation. Let's go over the key takeaways. Key takeaway number 1, creativity comes after curiosity and understanding. Key takeaway number 2, in learning more complexity, we then have to determine what do we actually do with that newly gained information. Key takeaway number 3, the tibia does have some rotation that occurs to help us achieve full knee extension. It likely does not have to be specifically practiced, rather achieve a quiet knee and a good quad contraction, and this rotation will start to happen naturally. However, if you are lacking that last little bit of knee extension, you seem to plateau, you've achieved a quiet knee, you have a good quad contraction, and it's still not happening, well then this may be the time that we start intentionally working on tibial rotation. Prehabbers, thank you for listening, thank you for sharing, subscribing, reviewing, leaving comments, sending in suggestions of topics that you want to learn about. All of this helps to get this podcast to more and more people. All right, we'll talk to you soon.